focusing together on this exploration. And Don, it's great to have you out here now to let us in on some of the adventures in your life.
Seeing the door shut and locked reminded me of being on the practicum. It was for 10 weeks. And we did 432 hours of psychodrama training for 10 weeks. And so it was pretty full on. But the morning sessions after the first week, Warren Parry got really pissed off that people were arriving late. So the door was locked until after tea break. And if you didn't get there, you went and read articles. It did enable me to read quite a few articles. This was in 1987. It was in 1987 that I did my practical assessment. And there were the practicum people plus the WASPI people. So I had 45 people in the group and 6 assessors. Techniques there as well as TDPs. We were learning to be assessors. It was announced around the community and a lot of people came. And when I had did my road training assessment in '84, I had over 50 people at the session. I grew up in a church. My parents both were part of the church, as well as being part of the Labour Party, and very active in that. And as a child, my church was bombed. And I can remember going to the church and sitting in the ruins of the church for some of the services during that time. When I was 14, I became junior youth group leader for the kids under 11 and also a Sunday school teacher for the primary group of the Sunday school, which was the 4, 5, 6, 7 something. And the leader of the our department at the Sunday school had been a teacher trainer at the Liverpool Teachers College, and she taught us to use impromptu participatory drama with the kids. So I was doing that when I was 14 and 15 at school. I was in the D stream through all my schooling until secondary schooling, and I was in the bottom of the D class. And when I was 9, I formed a group of kids. We used to go around, it was during wartime, and we went and entertained kids who were being looked after in the schools until their parents got home, maybe their mothers got home, to come and pick them up after working in the armament factories and so on. And we went around several nights a week to different schools doing this, and then the school said they wanted to honour us. And I can remember we did slapstick, and they asked us to perform, and we performed at an assembly. And then the head teacher said, "This is a demonstration that while not every child is bright and intelligent, they can still make us laugh." That junior head teacher has been the subject of many psychodramas. I went to university theological college. In my 20s, early 20s, Ben and I married just before I went, and that involved me having to go through all the committees that I'd already been through all over again, because I had to persuade everyone that it was a sensible thing for me to do to go as a married student when I'd already been selected and accepted as a single student. I was pretty determined. At Theological College,
Where are
in
you?
the second year in Nottingham.
Nottingham.
And in the second year, we had social psychology and sociometry occurred in that. That was my first touch. So that was 1957, 58. When I was asked to go to UA and some of the Pacific Islands to do youth leadership training, I did some preparatory training in Birmingham, in the Cedio colleges, and one of the things I did was a group course, and I didn't remember until many years later I got the notes out, and it was all, first 5 sessions were Merino and sociometry. I went to, that was in 1965. While I was in UA, my job really was to end the missionary era and just get the church
That's a small job.
to take responsibility for themselves. And so I said the first year, okay, let's prepare a constitution, and then at the end of the year, because the missionary was always president, then I'll stop being the president and you're elected president and so on. And the night before the ordination or the induction of the president, Reekie came to me from the other side of the island and came in the evening and said, look, Don, I've been thinking about this. I think it would be a good idea if I'd be vice president for the whole of the next year and you continue to be the president for 1 more year. Well, Reekie, that's wonderful, but that's not what we've agreed, and it's not what's going to happen, and you're going to be a great president. So this business is a matter, if you know, passing something on, you have to stop doing things. That's the main secret. And so for the last 2 years I was there, instead of doing things around the church, we were preparing for the first Pacific Islands Festival of Arts. And people said we can't take our dances, they're not good enough, and I persuaded them to do so. But then we went with the dance drama group around the whole of the island to each village and got the old people to teach chants, many of which people had never heard themselves before, and practiced those and dances and songs. And one old man brought out a nose flute that most people had never seen or certainly not heard played for God knows how long. And it was a wonderful time. One of the things we did was to prepare a major presentation. This was taken to the Fiji Super Arts Festival, 1972. And so we incorporated chant, songs, dances into an enactment of a historic event where one of the leaders of NUA at that time had made a significant difference to the way that the history went. And so we had the old people saying how it happened, and then got everyone to enact the experimenting until we eventually got something together. So I think that was my first experience of sociodrama. When I came to New Zealand, I thought I would do social work mainly with islanders. It seemed logical. But in fact, that wasn't as easy as I thought it was going to be anyway. And I ended up with 5 different opportunities after months and months and months of no bites, coming up in 1 week, and I decided to go to Kingsley Hospital as a chaplain. And so I was at Kingsley Hospital for just over 6 years, and before going there, I came to Christchurch for 7 months training at Sunnyside, St Margaret Hospital. Part of the training was 3 weeks at Calvary Clinic, which is now Southern Cross Hospital here. And Jack Ballance was running the psychiatric clinic. They didn't have OTs, they had artists, potters and so on. For the psychodrama, they had the director from the Repertory Theatre and psychotherapist, Arthur Mitchell books of Marino to read. Jack Ballance talked to him about meeting Marino and going across to the States, and that was about it. Nevertheless, the first experience I had, this woman with her father burning in the heart, and her seeing this from the outside and not being able to do anything. The woman's been deeply depressed for nearly 3 years. First 2 days I was there, there was really hardly any response from her to anything. She was in this drama. Compared with the dramas that we do and being trained in, it was a hopeless drama. Nevertheless, I was flames around the house, I think, and she did go in and be her father, but there was no other role reversal within the drama. The next day she was speaking, the next day she was more part of the community, within 3 weeks. And I thought, this is powerful. This is powerful. Went to the Kingsley Hospital, and husband and wife psychiatrist had come from England, where they, in their hospital, had a combination of Gestalt, Esalen and psychodrama, although the psychodrama was established on the basis of Maxwell Jones of Scotland, another psychiatrist who created psychodrama, and Marino and Zerka met him at the first conference of community psychiatry in the late 50s, and they were each very surprised to discover that the other one was the creator of psychodrama. However, there was Maxwell Jones' form that has influenced, I think, most of the hospitals in the Commonwealth, all around the world, and has meant that that form of psychodrama is considerably more limited. The hospital paid for me to go to my first workshop with Max in 1979, and my eyes were opened. We started in the morning at 10. We worked through the day, we didn't have breaks. But if we finished at 12, midnight, that was a bit of a surprise. And then Max was ready to dance. And we all went with him and we danced until 3 or 4. And then we went to bed and started the next day at 10. Everything about this experience was quite amazing for me. And I remember particularly the day we had Magic Shop. And Max introduced 4 of the largest men as German Gestapo guards to stop people getting into the magic shop. So not only had you... I can remember fighting with these 4 guys. By the time I got into the magic shop, I was worn out. But I had said I wanted to get rid of whatever and get... I can't remember what it was, but what I remember about... Once I was there, Max had me on the surgical table and people sliced me open, and then Max sucked out of my belly all the stuff I wanted to get rid of. The next year, I've been incredibly lucky. I haven't paid for some of my training, but I have also been in Presbyterian support services at a time when they valued training, and they employed Max to come for a week in February and August to work with us and the other workers in community services at Presbyterian support. At the end of the morning, I had realised that this is what I was doing with my hands. And so Max came over and stood in front of me. And I'm sure it was for at least a half an hour that he upbraided me uphill and downhill about letting go of the chair. The man on the left and the man on the right didn't come back in the afternoon and never came to any more of the sessions. They said that Max was abusive to me and such treatment in a training program was totally unacceptable, and neither of them could we argue with to persuade them to continue. They both gone. And at the end of the week, I talked to Max about the experience, and I said to him, I absolutely know for certain that whatever you are doing, you love me and you're doing it for my health. And that is true. It's how Max was and how he lived, and how I want to be with you, to be with them and for them. I've had lots of opportunities after 6 years at Kingston, where I had towards the end of the time I persuaded the doctors and staff to experiment sociometrically with the psychogeriatric wards and find out, for one thing, instead of having the chairs all around the room, group, but find out who people want to be with, and also find out who they liked having their hair combed by amongst the nurses, and all this sort of thing. And one of the wards when we did that had a change of charge nurse, and when the charge nurse came, the first thing the domestic staff complained about was that the chairs had been put all round the centre of the room, and they couldn't just sweep in and do the cleaning properly. It was much better when they were all round the edge of the room. And the chairs went all the way back on the basis of the complaint of the domestic staff to someone who had not experienced what we'd done and came from another place where it was just accepted that this was the way it was. And the nurses, who really appreciated this, kept some of the practices going. Sister Croydon was not moved, but a couple of the other wards continued. After I'd been away from Kingsey for just over 2 years, people told me that they were back the way they had been. And some of the other things that we instituted during the time that I was there, I had the opportunity of being convener of rehabilitation program at that time. And some of you may have read the article that I wrote on Creative Genius for last year's journal, and I worked with a group of women who had schizophrenia and who were part of a program where there was a general reinforcement that was working well for most people, but for this group it was just not working for them at all. And in fact their life practices deteriorated. And so the occupational therapy charge and I developed a program with these women. We thought of them as young women. They would have been probably in their late 30s. Most of them had come in their mid-teens, and their original diagnosis from their GP was masturbation. And their parents' anxieties and their doctor's concern eventually got them to psychiatrists and eventually got them into hospital. How many were schizophrenic at that time and how many became schizophrenic as a result of being in hospital, I don't know. So we worked on a basis that if we work in action, set up situations where they have to cooperate, some verbal communication will begin again. And it did. And eventually, they all went out into situations where they clattered in small groups and had visits from community psych nurses, mental health nurses these days. When I left Kingsey, I went to work at a community house in Manukau City. And for the first 3 months that I was there, I just went around the community visiting every place that I could and introducing myself, and then gradually began to get contacts and began to do more and more. And by that time, I was beginning to use and apply psychodrama. And I did that in group work and in individual practice, and began to get a bit of a reputation as someone who would go to for last resort. So I began to get referrals from the private practice psychiatric clinic in Auckland, excellent clinic as it was. there, and from the head injury clinic and the anorexia clinic at Middlemore Hospital. And I just did psychodrama with them one way or another. And we had some good results.
Leading workshops on role theory, role training. And I'm wondering, you probably don't only do that, but I'm wondering how come, what was your attraction to that particular way of working?
I believe that role is central to Maria and to his thinking, what he teaches us. And I think that really getting to grips with role assists me enormously to be excited about naming roles. And in doing so, we sometimes think, if we do that and get good, vital names, we're doing role theory. And I think there's much more to role than that. I think Marino left us a huge number of clues and pointers, but it's not cohesively organised in his writing, so you can pull it like when I found in Psychodrama 1, in the footnote, degrees of freedom, and I thought, surely he must have written more than this about it. Well, he may have done, but I don't think I found it. And yet, the whole notion of degrees of freedom in role is crucial to working with people, really thinking, okay, at this point, their degree of freedom is that they're taking, they're copying, they're restricted in this, but something new is possible here. And then role playing, where there's obviously more fluency, developing and taking it. And then role creation is the third level of degrees of freedom. And that is linked with the whole developmental theories of spontaneity that take up almost 100 pages. We can be learning psychodrama and miss quite a lot, and do quite well at psychodrama and still have missed quite a lot. My social atom paper was never accepted, and I wasn't told to rewrite it. I was told that for the whole of the practicum I would be watched. And if I demonstrated that I am a psychodramatist, and if I demonstrated that I have a depth of psychotherapy in my practice, and if I demonstrated that my heart was open to the protagonist I was working with, then I could do my practical assessment at the end of the 10 weeks. So I did my best. But one of the things I did, on the suggestion of Warren, I did some rebirthing. And I went to a woman who was in the playback group who did rebirthing. And I had an experience being in the womb and of having another baby with me and of killing the other baby. And it was a shocking experience. debriefing, it occurred to me that it must have been when I was 8 that my mother and father wanted to adopt a friend's boy, the mother. He was widowed. And so this boy, whose name was also Donald, and who was actually had the same birthday date as mine, was also 8 years old. And my mother takes me upstairs and says, "Donald, we're thinking it would be a good idea for us to adopt Donald, and then you'd have a brother." And I remember, no! It didn't happen. But I was sitting in the theatre just before Tom Wilson's psychodrama session during the practice. Got a letter from Sally Christie. Sue Christie is here, some of you would have met her. And Sally had had several miscarriages, but this time she had twins, and she'd gone well full term, but she wrote to me and told me that the twins had died. And I wept and wept and wept. And a few months later, my mother, in response to my writing and telling her that my daughter had had a scan during the first pregnancy, and so on, my mother says, "Oh, we didn't have scans, we only had x-rays when I was having you, and you were going to be twins." But one of the twins, the other baby was reabsorbed into the womb. No one had ever mentioned that to me my whole life. In my rebirthing experience, I was sure this was a girl, and I also felt guilty and ashamed of killing this girl. And I think this has been something that has been in my life in relation to women. I think I have difficulty when I've got a relationship going that has two women, and I think I also have most of my life been overprotective or whatever in my relationship with women. I think role is a thing it's a matter of, our task is to meet the other person, to really meet them. And as a director, I feel my task is to really meet the protagonists. So I really pay attention to them and listen to them, see them. And as a director, I think that I'm doubling and feeling into the experience as much as I can of this person that I'm with. And this assists me, I think, to have a sense of the role the person is in. And I think I've got 20 pointers or clues that I've picked up from Marino one way and another, that Viv and I are going to include in what we do on Friday afternoon. And I think every one of them is really significant. So, I want to promote role and meeting and appreciating and understanding the people we work with. When I was asked to be part of this by these two people, I immediately thought, when I came into psychodrama, two of my elders were Jenny and Bev. That was back, I joined PINS in 1981. PINS being Psychodrama Institute in New Zealand. And went to my first workshop with Max in 1979. And so I became secretary of PINS at the 82 Auckland Conference, AANZPA Conference, and worked alongside Wayne Scott, who was director of PINS. And Wayne used to talk to me about this woman, this wonderful woman that was doing such great work in internal affairs. Is that right, internal affairs? And as an internal consultant and applying the method there. And Bev was doing workshops with Wayne in role training up and down the country and applying it in her community work in Wellington. So these were elders that inspired me.